You are a samurai, not the Hollywood version, not the lone swordsman walking through bamboo forests at sunset, not the silent killer with the top knot and the perfect blade. The real version. You wake up this morning in a wooden house in a small castle town. You put on a robe, not armor, a robe. You walk to your office. You have an office. You had breakfast an hour ago? Barley, beans, ash. A specific diet designed by someone who knows exactly what your body needs to perform at maximum capacity. Today, you fight. And here's the thing nobody tells you about today. Your opponent is probably not going to die, and neither are you. Before we talk about what samurai life really looked like, we need to talk about timing. Because the version of the samurai you have in your head, the warrior, the duelist, the lone wolf with a code, that version existed. It just existed for a very short window of Japanese history. And it was over by 1615. The samurai class existed in Japan for roughly 700 years. Of those 700 years, the period of constant warfare, the Sengoku Jidai, the time of warring states, lasted about 150. That is the period the movies are about. That is the period of Akira Kurosawa films and warlords and battles and duels. Then in 1603, a man named Tokugawa Ieyasu won the last big war. He established the Tokugawa shogunate, and for the next 268 years, Japan had peace. Not a fragile peace, not an uneasy peace, actual peace. The longest period of internal peace any major country has had in recorded history. 268 years. The samurai class was not abolished. The samurai class kept existing. They kept their swords. They kept their status. They kept their privileges. What they lost was the only job they were originally trained for: fighting. So what did they do instead? They became bureaucrats. This is the part that nobody puts in the movies, because it is not a movie. The samurai of the Edo period, which is most of the samurai who ever lived, were paperwork people. They administered tax collection. They ran provincial offices. They handled legal disputes. They managed grain storage. They organized public works. They wrote reports. They filed those reports. They argued about budgets. A samurai in 1750 was statistically far more likely to die from gout than from a sword wound. The pay system tells you everything. Samurai were not paid in money. They were paid in rice. A specific amount measured in koku, one koku being roughly the amount of rice needed to feed one person for 1 year. Your rank was your koku. Your family had a hereditary stipend, fixed often for generations. Here is the problem. Rice stipends did not increase. The cost of living did. Over 2 centuries of peace, Japan developed a sophisticated money economy. Merchants got rich, cities grew. Goods became more expensive, and the samurai, paid in a fixed amount of rice, got poorer every decade. By the late Edo period, most samurai were broke. Not broke in the relative sense, broke in the actual sense. Borrowing money from merchants, defaulting on debts, pawning their family heirlooms, selling their armor. The warrior class of Japan was, by the 18th century, primarily in debt to grocers. Let us talk about the sword. Every samurai carried 2 swords, the katana and the wakizashi. The right to wear 2 swords was a legal privilege restricted to the samurai class. It was the visible symbol of their status. Most of them could not really use those swords. Sword training existed. Schools existed. Some samurai trained seriously. But the majority of Edo period samurai trained the way a modern office worker trains for self-defense. Occasionally. Not very well. Enough to say they had done it. When samurai duels did happen, which was rare and increasingly illegal, they were often clumsy, brief, and embarrassing. Eyewitness accounts from the period describe duels ending in moments, with both participants flailing, missing, or freezing. The choreographed cinematic duel where 2 masters circle each other reading the wind, that is not what these encounters looked like. These were men who had inherited their swords and had not used them in earnest. The actual martial skill in Japan during this period was increasingly held by professional sword instructors, many of whom were of low rank or even commoners by birth. The hereditary samurai class was, in many cases, less skilled with weapons than the people they were technically allowed to look down on. Now, we have to talk about Bushido. The way of the warrior, the code of honor, the 8 virtues, the willingness to die for one's lord. Bushido as a formalized code did not exist during the period of actual samurai warfare. It was largely codified during the peaceful Edo period, by samurai who were no longer fighting, as a way to give their increasingly purposeless class a sense of identity and meaning. The book most associated with Bushido in the modern Western imagination, Bushido, The Soul of Japan, was written by Inazo Nitobe in 1900, in English, for a Western audience, after the samurai class had already been abolished, by a man who was himself a Christian convert trying to explain Japan to Americans. The code that everyone associates with samurai was substantially constructed after the samurai stopped existing. This is not to say honor codes did not exist among warriors during the Sengoku period. They did. But they were inconsistent, regional, contradictory, and frequently ignored. Warlords betrayed each other constantly. Samurai changed sides for money. Loyalty was real, but it was also negotiable. The pure, austere, self-sacrificing samurai of the imagination is a literary creation. The real samurai of the Warring States period were closer to mercenary captains. The real samurai of the Edo period were closer to civil servants. Neither group spent much time meditating on death under cherry blossoms. The end of the samurai is the part of the story that is genuinely strange. In 1868, the Meiji Restoration overthrew the Tokugawa shogunate. The new government wanted to modernize Japan. To compete with Western powers, they needed a modern army. A modern army meant conscription. Conscription meant ordinary citizens with rifles. The samurai class was abolished in stages between 1869 and 1876. Their hereditary stipends were converted to government bonds and then phased out. Their right to wear swords in public was revoked in 1876. Some samurai adapted. Many became officers in the new imperial army. Many became businessmen, scholars, or government officials. The skills they had built up over centuries of peace, administration, literacy, organization, turned out to be exactly what a modernizing country needed. The bureaucratic samurai were better positioned for the modern world than the warrior samurai would have been. Some did not adapt. The Satsuma Rebellion of 1877 was the last samurai uprising, led by Saigo Takamori. The rebels fought with a mix of swords and outdated firearms against an imperial army with modern artillery and conscript soldiers. They lost. Of course they lost. The samurai had been bureaucrats for 250 years. They were never going to win a modern war. The romance of the samurai is largely a creation of the period after they stopped existing. Films, novels, manga, video games, all looking back at a class that spent most of its history at desks, and reimagining it as a class that spent most of its history with swords. The samurai of legend lived for about 150 years. The samurai of paperwork lived for more than 500. The legend won. The reality is more interesting. You wake up this morning in a wooden house in a small castle town. You put on a robe, you walk to your office, you sit at a low desk, and you begin reviewing rice tax records. You are 43 years old. You are a samurai. Your great-grandfather fought at Sekigahara. You have never been in a fight in your life. Your back hurts from sitting. Your sword sits on a stand in the corner of the room. You have not touched it in months. The movies will not be made about you. They will be made about your great-grandfather. But you are what a samurai actually was. For most of the time, samurai existed. The warriors got the legend, the bureaucrats got the centuries.